The story of human civilization is, in many ways, the story of a decision. It is a choice made long ago, buried beneath layers of silt and memory. A choice to stop moving and to start building. To understand the Tower of Babel not merely as a myth, but as a memory of a fallen superstate, we must first understand the world that existed before the first brick was laid. We must go back to the silence of the pre-urban Earth. Imagine the world as it was when the ice had retreated, when the great herds still moved in vast, thundering rivers of flesh across the steppes. For thousands of years, the human experience was defined by the horizon. We were a species of the open air, etched into the landscape, but not yet masters of it. The rhythm of life was dictated not by the clock or the overseer, but by the migration of the gazelle, the ripening of wild wheat, and the turning of the seasons. We were wanderers. To live was to move. The horizon was a limit to be respected, not a challenge to be conquered. But then, deep in the Neolithic past, a shift occurred, a psychological pivot as profound as the discovery of fire. A group of these wanderers, moving from the east, descended from the rugged, unpredictable highlands. They left the cool, stony shadows of the mountains and entered a new world, a flat, sweeping expanse known to history as the Plain of Shinar. This land, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was unlike anything they had known before. It was the Fertile Crescent, but to the uninitiated eye, it might have looked like a wasteland of heat and dust. The sun here does not merely shine, it hammers the earth. It is a relentless, golden weight that presses down upon the land, baking the soil into a hard, cracked mosaic. The heat shimmers off the ground in waves, blurring the distance, turning the horizon into a liquid mirage. In the silence of the desert, the only sound is the wind, a dry, ancient breath that whispers through the reeds and carries the scent of baked mud and distant water. And yet, this forbidding landscape held a secret. It was an alluvial plain, a land built by the rivers themselves. For eons, the Tigris and the Euphrates had flooded, depositing layer upon layer of rich, nutrient-dense silt. This mud was black gold. It was a soil of infinite potential, waiting for a hand to shape it. Unlike the rocky hills, where a farmer had to fight for every inch of arable land, Shinar was a blank canvas. It was a place where geometry could be imposed upon the organic chaos of nature. It whispered a promise to those weary travelers. Here, you do not need to hunt. Here, you can rule. The migration to Shinar represents the first great centralization of humanity. It was here that the primal fear of dispersion, the deep ancestral anxiety of being scattered and small in a vast, indifferent world, met the solution of density. In the wilderness, a family could vanish, swallowed by the forest or the storm. The night was dark and full of unknown eyes. But on the plain, gathered together in the thousands, humanity found a new kind of immortality. We see here the dawn of a profound psychological trade-off, one that we are still making today. We traded the absolute autonomy of the nomad for the security of the grain surplus. We traded the silence of the open steppe for the noise of the crowded street. We traded the freedom of the chaotic wild for the safety of the ordered wall. Consider the psychological shift required to become a sedentary mass. For the first time, a human being looked at a stranger and saw not a threat, but a neighbor. The concept of Shinar, what the Sumerians called the land of the civilized lords, became the cradle of the first true cities. But a city is not just a collection of houses, it is a collection of minds. It requires a suppression of the impulse to flee. It requires a commitment to stay, even when the neighbor is loud, even when the ruler is harsh, even when the walls feel less like a fortress and more like a cage. The ancient texts speak of a collective desire to make a name for themselves, lest they be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. This is a revelation of deep human vulnerability. The city was born out of a fear of oblivion. To be a nomad is to be anonymous to history. You leave no ruins, only footprints that the wind erases by morning. But to build a city is to demand that the future remembers you. It is an act of defiance against time itself. And so, the people of Shinar looked at the mud beneath their feet and saw the future. They saw the possibility of permanence. As they settled, the landscape of Shinar began to change. The chaotic, meandering paths of the herds were replaced by the straight lines of irrigation canals. This is the imposition of geometry upon nature. Compare this settling to the clearing of the Amazon or the colonization of new frontiers in later ages. It is the same impulse to domesticate the wild, to turn the tangled undergrowth into a grid. The unpredictability of the river floods was tamed by levees and dikes. The water was forced to obey the will of the engineer. The transition from the Neolithic period to the Uruk period, the era of urbanization, was not instantaneous. It was a slow, rhythmic accumulation of complexity. First came the permanent hearths, then the clustered mud brick homes, then the temples, and finally the walls. The population swelled. The surplus of grain allowed for more babies to survive, which in turn required more grain, which required more land to be tilled, which required more organization. It was a feedback loop of growth, a gravitational pull that drew more and more people from the surrounding hills into the gravity well of the city. In the heat of the Mesopotamian afternoon, the silence of the desert was replaced by the sounds of industry, the grinding of grain, the bleating of domesticated goats, the shouting of overseers, the slap of wet mud against wood. This was the music of the new era. It was the sound of the unified mass finding its rhythm. But there was a shadow to this light. In the wilderness, the hierarchy was simple: the strong, the wise, the elders. In the city, hierarchy became abstract. The surplus grain had to be stored, and whoever controlled the granary controlled the people. The security of the grain surplus came at the cost of dependency. A nomad carries his wealth on his back. A citizen's wealth is locked in a storehouse he does not own. The people of Shinar had found safety, yes, but they had also found the first chains of the state. They were no longer distinct tribes wandering the earth. They were becoming a single organism. The diversity of the nomadic bands, each with their own customs, their own spirits of the trees and rocks, began to dissolve into the homogeneity of the urban culture. They were trading the anonymity of nomadic life for the name of the city. But in doing so, they were losing the individuality of the soul. As the sun sets over the plain of Shinar in our imagination, visualize the fires of the first kilnis beginning to glow against the twilight. The horizontal expansion across the land, the spreading of fields and canals is reaching its limit. The land is full. The only place left to go is up. The eyes of the people turn from the horizon to the vertical. They look from the soil to the sky. The materials for this ascent are humble. There is no stone here, no towering cedars of Lebanon. There is only mud. Infinite, ubiquitous mud. But in the mind of the Shinar builders, this mud is about to undergo a transformation. It is about to be purified by fire. The era of the stone is ending. The era of the brick is beginning. And with the brick comes the power to build not just a shelter, but a mountain. The air cools as night falls over the plain. The stars emerge, brilliant and hard in the desert sky. The same stars that watched the nomads sleep in the open. But now, the people do not sleep in the open. They sleep behind walls, huddled together in the labyrinth of the growing city, dreaming of a structure that will pierce the veil of the heavens. The transition is complete. The wanderers have become builders. The Plain of Shinar is no longer just a place on a map. It is the foundation of the first superstate. We have moved from the soil to the brick. The transition is subtle to the eye, but violent to the spirit. To understand the rise of the superstate, one must look closely at the materials from which it is composed. In the high mountains from which these people came, the world was built of stone. Stone is a child of the earth, born of geological chaos and deep time. It is jagged, irregular, and stubborn. If you wish to build a wall of stone, you must negotiate with it. You must find the face that fits. You must respect the grain. No two stones are ever truly alike. This is the architecture of the wild, resilient, beautiful, but difficult to master. It speaks of a world where the individual element dictates the shape of the whole. But in the alluvial mud of Shinar, there is no stone. There is only the river and the dust. If civilization was to rise here, it could not rely on the gifts of the mountains. It had to invent a new geology. It had to master the art of fabrication. And so, the narrative tells us of a technological revolution that sounds almost like an incantation. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." Consider the profundity of the brick. It is the first true object of mass production in human history. To make a brick is to impose a human standard upon the natural world. You take the wet, chaotic clay of the riverbank, the very stuff of formlessness, and you press it into a wooden mold. You force the earth to conform to a geometric ideal. When you lift the mold, what remains is a rectangular block, identical in every dimension to the one that came before it and the one that will follow. The brick is the physical embodiment of the concept of sameness. In the world of stone, diversity is the rule. In the world of brick, uniformity is the law. This shift from the gathered stone to the manufactured brick is not merely an architectural choice. It is the technological foundation of the superstate. It represents the moment humanity realized that to build on a massive scale, we must eliminate the variable. We must eliminate the unique. We must trust in the reliability of the identical. Listen to the rhythm of the Plain of Shinar during this explosion of industry. It is a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. The squelch of clay being trampled by thousands of feet to mix it with straw. The slap of the mud into the wooden frames. The cracking of the fires. The text tells us they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Bitumen is a naturally occurring tar, a black, viscous substance that bubbles up from the ground in this oil-rich region. It is the perfect binding agent. If the brick is the bone of the city, bitumen is the tendon. It seals the gaps. It creates a watertight, airtight unity. But the process did not stop at mere drying. The text specifies they burned them thoroughly. Sun-dried bricks are useful, but they are fragile. They dissolve in the rain. To build a tower that reaches the heavens, you need something harder. you need the kill. You need to subject the earth to intense, transformative heat. This is the industrialization of construction. Imagine the smoke rising from thousands of kilns across the plain, darkening the midday sun. The consumption of fuel brushwood reeds, perhaps timber floated down the river's wood, have been staggering. It was an economic engine that demanded constant feeding. The landscape was being consumed to feed the city. In this heat, the clay changes, it vitrifies, it becomes stone-like, but a stone of human design. It becomes impervious to the elements. This is the great promise of the superstate. We can create something more durable than nature itself. We can bake the weakness out of the earth. However, as we meditate on the image of the brick row upon row, stacked in perfect alignment, we begin to see the metaphor that underpins this entire history. The brick is not just a building material. The brick is a symbol of the citizen. In a tribe of nomads, every individual is a stone distinct, shaped by their own history, fitting into the group in a loose, organic way. But in the superstate, there is no room for the irregular stone. The state requires bricks. It requires citizens who are uniform, replaceable, and molded by the system. To be a part of the tower, you must fit into the mold. You must be the same size and shape as your neighbor. If you are too large, you disrupt the line. If you are too small, you create a weak point. The education of a citizen in a complex society is the process of being pressed into the mold. It is the process of smoothing out the rough edges of the personality so that one can sit flush against another. It is the acceptance of a standardized shape for the greater good of the structure. This is the trade-off of civilization. To build high, we must submit to the mold. We must allow ourselves to be burned thoroughly by the cultural kiltha, rites of passage, the social norms, the laws until we are hardened into reliable units of society. This brings us to the one-language theory. The narrative states that the whole earth was of one language and one speech. While it is easy to read this as a linguistic miracle that everyone spoke the same dialect of Sumerian or Akkadian, the historical and economic context suggests something far more structural. In the rise of the first empires, language was not just about poetry or conversation. It was about administration. To manage a project of this magnitude, to coordinate the labor of tens of thousands of workers, to feed them, to house them, to transport millions of bricks, you need more than just words. You need data. You need a standardized system of information. This one language was likely the language of bureaucracy. It was the standardization of weights and measures. A gur of barley must mean the same thing to the farmer in the north as it does to the baker in the south. A cubit must be the exact same length for the mason on the ground as it is for the architect on the summit. We see here the birth of the information state. The invention of writing in Mesopotamia was driven by the need to track debt, taxes, and inventory. The clay tablets that fill our museums are rarely poems. They are receipts. They are the one language of economic uniformity. This administrative uniformity is the invisible mortar that holds the empire together. It allows the center to communicate with the periphery without distortion. It creates a shared reality where everyone operates by the same set of rules, the same calendar, the same value system. There is a seductive power to this uniformity. When everyone speaks the one language of the system, friction disappears. Trade becomes frictionless. Cooperation becomes seamless. This is the intoxication of collective capability. Focus on the psychology of the builders in this moment. It is easy to paint them as slaves, whipping, scarred, and miserable, but the truth is likely more complex and more unsettling. There is a joy in the collective. There is a profound sense of purpose that comes from being a part of something larger than oneself. When the individual ego dissolves into the group, when the I becomes the we, there is a release of anxiety. This is the psychology of groupthink in its most potent form. Imagine standing on the Plain of Shinar, surrounded by the dust and the noise. You are no longer just a shepherd or a potter. You are a builder of the axis mundi. You are participating in the elevation of humanity. The man to your left passes a brick. You take it and pass it to the man on your right. The motion is rhythmic, almost distinct from thought. You are a cell in a giant body. The body is the city, and the city is immortal. This feeling is the intoxication of the superstate. It is the belief that because we are many and because we are organized, we can achieve anything. Nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. This is the hubris of the engineer. It is the belief that if we can just get the logistics right, if we can just produce enough bricks, if we can just get everyone to speak the one language, we can solve the problem of the human condition. We can build our way out of our mortality. The mood shifts now. The industrious noise of the brick-making, the wet slap of mud, the crackle of dry reeds begins to fade into the background. The focus shifts from the materials on the ground to the structure that is beginning to rise. The foundation has been laid. The footprint of the tower is etched into the earth, a massive square of perfect geometry. The first tiers are rising. The atmosphere changes from the chaotic energy of the work camp to a sense of awe and slight, trembling fear. The sheer scale of what is happening begins to dawn on the people. They are altering the skyline. They are competing with the mountains. The ambition is no longer theoretical. It is physical. It casts a shadow. As the tower grows, it begins to demand more. It demands more bricks, more bitumen, more labor, more devotion. The machine has been switched on, and it is hungry. The sun beats down on the rising ziggurat, and the heat radiating from the thousands of fresh-baked bricks makes the air tremble. The mood shifts from industrious noise to awe and slight hubris. The people look up, shielding their eyes against the glare, and they do not see a building. They see a path that leads away from the earth, away from the dust of their origins, and toward something blindingly, terrifyingly bright. The technology of unity has worked. The bricks are holding. The superstate is rising. The dust of the brick-making has settled, and from the haze of the kill-fires, a shape begins to emerge. It is a shape that dominates the flat horizon of the Plain of Shinar, a geometric mountain rising from the chaos of the earth. We have entered the era of the axis mundi, the center of the world. To understand the tower, we must strip away our modern conception of a building. We look at skyscrapers today and see offices, apartments, functionality, but the ancients saw something entirely different. The structure rising in the heart of the city was not designed for human habitation. It was a machine. It was a spiritual technology designed to bridge the chasm between the mortal and the divine. The historical inspiration for Babel, the great Etemenanki of Babylon, gives us a glimpse of this ambition. Its name translates to the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This title reveals the central idea of the project. The tower was the anchor. It was the pin that held the cosmos together. In the minds of the builders, the universe was a volatile, unpredictable place. Gods were capricious, Storms were sudden. Chaos was always waiting at the edges of the firelight. To build the Ziggurat was to impose order on the cosmos itself. It was an attempt to freeze time, to lock the heavens in place, and to ensure that the connection between the gods and the city remained unbroken. The structure itself was likely a stepped pyramid, a series of platforms shrinking as they ascended. This shape is not accidental. It is the shape of stability. It is the shape of a mountain. In the mythology of the Near East, the gods dwelt on the high peaks, the mountains of the north and east, the places where the earth touched the sky. But Shinar was flat. There were no mountains here. And so, with the hubris that defines the superstate, the people decided that if nature would not provide a holy mountain, they would build one. As the tower rose, layer by layer, it became the visual representation of the hierarchy of the state. At the bottom, the massive, broad-based, the common people, the bricks, the millions of standardized lives supporting the weight of the structure. Above them, the priests, the administrators, the scribes, the managers of the one language, and at the very peak, a small, exclusive temple, often plated in gold or blue glazed brick, to merge with the sky. This was the domain of the few. This is where the fusion of government and religion becomes complete. In the tribal past, the shaman or the elder might have held spiritual authority, but they lived among the people. In the superstate, the spiritual authority is elevated literally. To reach the divine, one must now ascend the structure of the state. Access to the gods is no longer free. It is mediated by the architecture of power. The king becomes the pontifex, the bridge builder between the seen and the unseen. The philosophical tension here is palpable. It is the Promethean impulse, the desire to steal fire from the gods, to take what is not given. The narrative asks a quiet, dangerous question. Is the state attempting to replace God? When the text says, "Let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven," it is voicing the ultimate seductive thought of the human condition, that we can transcend our limits through our own effort. We can engineer our own salvation. If we just pile enough bricks, if we just organize enough labor, if we just concentrate enough wealth, we can storm the gates of the absolute. We can look the divine in the eye and say, "We are here. We are your equals." This centralization of power is often associated in tradition with the figure of Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. While the oldest texts are sparse on details, the archetype of Nimrod represents the first tyrant, the first human to consolidate power, not through wisdom, but through force and organization. He is the personification of the superstate. He is the one who says, "I will provide your security, I will provide your bread, I will provide your meaning, but in exchange, you must give me your freedom. You must become a brick." The Ziggurat is his throne. It is a staircase for the gods to descend, yes, but it is also a platform for the ruler to look down. Imagine standing on the summit of the unfinished tower. The air is thinner here. The wind is stronger, whipping the robes of the priests who stand watch. Below you, the city of Babel spreads out like a grand, intricate circuit board. The streets are straight lines. The canals are arteries. The people are invisible specks, moving in predetermined patterns. From this height, the humanity of the individual vanishes. The suffering of the brickmaker, the sweat of the farmer, the cry of the child, none of it reaches this altitude. From the top of the tower, the world looks like a map. It looks manageable. It looks like a system that can be controlled. This is the danger of the view from above. It creates a detachment. a cold rationality that sees population statistics rather than human lives. It is the intoxication of the planner who believes he can arrange society as easily as he arranges stones on a game board. We must pause here and reflect on the timelessness of this image. The Tower of Babel is not just a story about ancient Mesopotamia. It is a story about us. We are still building towers. Look at the skylines of our modern cities, the Burj Khalifa, the Shanghai Tower, the spikes of glass and steel in Manhattan. What are they but modern ziggurats? They are declarations of dominance. They are economic barometers. They are the axis mundi of global finance. Or look further, to our rockets, sitting on launch pads, pillars of fire aimed at the black void of space. We are still driven by the same restless, vertical ambition. We still want to reach heaven. We still want to leave the earth behind, to escape the messy, organic limitations of our biology and upload ourselves into the perfect silicon brick of the digital ether. The technology changes from mud brick to steel beam, from bitumen to carbon fiber, but the psychology remains the same. It is the hunger for the infinite. It is the refusal to accept that we are creatures of the dust. But there is a flaw in the design. The higher you build, the more unstable the structure becomes. Not necessarily in terms of physics, our engineers are brilliant, but in terms of sociology. The higher the elite rise above the foundation, the more disconnected they become from the reality of the ground. The one language of the penthouse is not the language of the street. As we linger on the image of the tower reaching its zenith, a sense of vertigo sets in. The perfect order of the superstate, which looked so beautiful from the drawing board, begins to show stress fractures. The system is too tight. The centralization is too extreme. The human spirit is compressed to the point of explosion. The builders on the scaffoldings look at each other, and for the first time, there is a flicker of confusion in their eyes. A command is shouted from above, but it is not understood below. The logistical chain shudders. The vast, complex machine of the tower, which requires perfect synchronization to function, misses a beat. The view from the top is dizzying, but the view from the bottom is becoming angry. The grand unity is about to be tested. The transition from the awe of the ascent to the chaos of the collapse is beginning. We move now from the grandeur of the structure to the confusion in the streets below. The silence of the summit is about to be broken by the noise of 1,000 different tongues. The tower stands suspended in the heavy air of the Mesopotamian afternoon. From a distance, it looks like a permanent fixture of the geology, a mountain that has always been and will always be. But if you press your ear against the brickwork, you can hear a vibration. It is not the hum of progress anymore. It is the low, grinding frequency of strain. We have reached the turning point of the narrative. The ascent has ended. The unraveling begins. We enter now into the mystery of the confusion of tongues for millennia. This event has been depicted in Sunday school lessons and Renaissance paintings as a sudden, chaotic miracular, divine thunderclap that instantly scrambled the neural pathways of the builders, replacing coherence with babble. But if we slow down, if we look at this through the lens of history, sociology, and systems theory, a different picture emerges. We see not a magical instant, but a process. We see the inevitable, heartbreaking mechanics of a system's collapse. Consider the sheer weight of the superstate at its zenith. It is not just the physical weight of the millions of bricks pressing down on the foundation. It is the cognitive weight of the complexity required to keep it all moving. The one language of the administration, the massive bureaucracy of scribes, overseers, grain counters, and water managers has become a labyrinth. In the early days, the system was efficient. The investment in complexity paid off. You gave up your freedom. You became a brick. But in return, you got safety, food, and a sense of glory. But as the tower grows higher, the cost of maintaining it explodes. This is the law of diminishing returns on complexity, a concept articulated by the historian Joseph Tainter. Tainter suggests that civilizations don't collapse because they are stupid. They collapse because they become too expensive to maintain. As the society grows, every new problem is solved by adding a new layer of bureaucracy, a new law, a new tax, a new control. Eventually, the energy required just to maintain the status quo exceeds the energy the society can produce. The one language becomes too heavy to speak. Imagine the logistical nightmare on the Plain of Shinar. The supply lines are stretched too thin. The orders from the summit take too long to reach the ground. By the time a command is relayed from the high priest to the clay mixer, the situation has changed. The feedback loops are broken. The architect asks for cedar. The foreman delivers straw. The scribe records a surplus. The granary is empty. This is the true confusion of tongues. It is the breakdown of the shared reality. It is when the official narrative of the state no longer matches the lived experience of the people. The government says, "We are prosperous. We are one." The brickmaker looks at his empty bowl and says, "I am hungry. I am alone." The language of the center has become a foreign tongue to the periphery. When this dissonance reaches a breaking point, the psychological glue that holds the superstate together begins to dissolve. We spoke earlier of groupthink, the intoxication of the collective. Now we see the flip side, cognitive overload. When the world becomes too complex to understand, when the rules change too often, when the hierarchy is too vast to navigate, the human mind retreats. We cannot process the global, so we retreat to the local. Trust evaporates. In a high-trust society, you can cooperate with a stranger because you both speak the one language of shared norms. But when the system fractures, that stranger becomes a potential threat. You stop looking at the tower. You start looking at your immediate survival. You stop identifying as a citizen of Babel, and you remember that you are a shepherd from the Zagros Mountains, or a fisherman from the marshes. As the tower rose, layer by layer, it became the visual representation of the hierarchy of the state. At the bottom, the massive, broad base, the common people, the bricks, the millions of standardized lives supporting the weight of the structure. Above them, the priests, the administrators, the scribes, the managers of the one language. And at the very peak, a small, exclusive temple, often plated in gold or blue glazed brick to merge with the sky. This was the domain of the few. This is where the fusion of government and religion becomes complete. In the tribal past, the shaman or the elder might have held spiritual authority, but they lived among the people. In the superstate, the spiritual authority is elevated to reach the divine. One must now ascend the structure of the state. Access to the gods is no longer free. It is mediated by the architecture of power. The king becomes the pontifex, the bridge builder between the seen and the unseen. The philosophical tension here is palpable. It is the Promethean impulse, the desire to steal fire from the gods, to take what is not given. The narrative asks a quiet, dangerous question. Is the state attempting to replace God? When the text says, "Let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. It is voicing the ultimate seductive thought of the human condition, that we can transcend our limits through our own effort. We can engineer our own salvation. If we just pile enough bricks, if we just organize enough labor, if we just concentrate enough wealth, we can storm the gates of the absolute. We can look the divine in the eye and say, "We are here. We are your equals." This centralization of power is often associated in tradition with the figure of Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. While the oldest texts are sparse on details, the archetype of Nimrod represents the first tyrant, the first human to consolidate power not through wisdom, but through force and organization. He is the personification of the superstate. He is the one who says, "I will provide your security. I will provide your bread. I will provide your meaning. But in exchange, you must give me your freedom. You must become a brick." The Ziggurat is his throne. It is a staircase for the gods to descend, yes, but it is also a platform for the ruler to look down. Imagine standing on the summit of the unfinished tower. The air is thinner here. The wind is stronger, whipping the robes of the priests who stand watch. Below you, the city of Babel spreads out like a grand, intricate circuit board. The streets are straight lines. The canals are arteries. The people are invisible specks moving in predetermined patterns. From this height, the humanity of the individual vanishes. The suffering of the brickmaker, the sweat of the farmer, the cry of the child, none of it reaches this altitude. From the top of the tower, the world looks like a map. It looks manageable. It looks like a system that can be controlled. This is the danger of the view from above. It creates a detachment, a cold rationality that sees population statistics rather than human lives. It is the intoxication of the planner who believes he can arrange society as easily as he arranges stones on a game board. We must pause here and reflect on the timelessness of this image. The Tower of Babel is not just a story about ancient Mesopotamia. It is a story about us. We are still building towers. Look at the skylines of our modern cities, the Burj Khalifa, the Shanghai Tower, the spikes of glass and steel in Manhattan. What are they but modern ziggurats? They are declarations of dominance. They are economic barometers. They are the axis mundi of global finance. Or look further, to our rockets sitting on launch pads, pillars of fire aimed at the black void of space. We are still driven by the same restless, vertical ambition. We still want to reach heaven. We still want to leave the earth behind, to escape the messy organic limitations of our biology and upload ourselves into the perfect silicon brick of the digital ether. The technology changes from mud brick to steel beam, from bitumen to carbon fiber, but the psychology remains the same. It is the hunger for the infinite. It is the refusal to accept that we are creatures of the dust. But there is a flaw in the design. The higher you build, the more unstable the structure becomes. Not necessarily in terms of physics. Our engineers are brilliant, but in terms of sociology, the higher the elite rise above the foundation, the more disconnected they become from the reality of the ground. The one language of the penthouse is not the language of the street. As we linger on the image of the tower reaching its zenith, a sense of vertigo sets in. The perfect order of the superstate, which looked so beautiful from the drawing board, begins to show stress fractures. The system is too tight. The centralization is too extreme. The human spirit, the builders on the scaffoldings look at each other, and for the first time, there is a flicker of confusion in their eyes. A command is shouted from above, but it is not understood below. The logistical chain shudders. The vast, complex machine of the tower, which requires perfect synchronization to function, misses a beat. The view from the top is dizzying, but the view from the bottom is becoming angry. The grand unity is about to be tested. The transition from the awe of the ascent to the chaos of the collapse is beginning. We move now from the grandeur of the structure to the confusion in the streets below. The silence of the summit is about to be broken by the noise of 1,000 different tongues. The tower stands, suspended in the heavy air of the Mesopotamian afternoon. From a distance, it looks like a permanent fixture of the geology, a mountain that has always been and will always be. But if you press your ear against the brickwork, you can hear a vibration. It is not the hum of progress anymore. It is the low, grinding frequency of strain. We have reached the turning point of the narrative. The ascent has ended. The unraveling begins. We enter now into the mystery of the confusion of tongues for millennia. This event has been depicted in Sunday school lessons and Renaissance paintings as a sudden, chaotic miracle, a divine thunderclap that instantly scrambled the neural pathways of the builders, replacing coherence with babble. But if we slow down, if we look at this through the lens of history, sociology, and systems theory, a different picture emerges. We see not a magical instant, but a process. We see the inevitable, heartbreaking mechanics of a system's collapse. Consider the sheer weight of the superstate at its zenith. It is not just the physical weight of the millions of bricks pressing down on the foundation. It is the cognitive weight of the complexity required to keep it all moving. The one language of the administration, the massive bureaucracy of scribes, overseers, grain counters, and water managers has become a labyrinth. In the early days, the system was efficient. The investment in complexity paid off. You gave up your freedom. You became a brick. But in return, you got safety, food, and a sense of glory. But as the tower grows higher, the cost of maintaining it explodes. This is the law of diminishing returns on complexity, a concept articulated by the historian Joseph Tainter. Tainter suggests that civilizations don't collapse because they are stupid. They collapse because they become too expensive to maintain. As the society grows, every new problem is solved by adding a new layer of bureaucracy. A new law, a new tax, a new control. Eventually, the energy required just to maintain the status quo exceeds the energy the society can produce. The one language becomes too heavy to speak. Imagine the logistical nightmare on the Plain of Shinar. The supply lines are stretched too thin. The orders from the summit take too long to reach the ground. By the time a command is relayed from the high priest to the clay mixer, the situation has changed. The feedback loops are broken. The architect asks for cedar. The foreman delivers straw. The scribe records a surplus. The granary is empty. This is the true confusion of tongues. It is the breakdown of the shared reality. It is when the official narrative of the state no longer matches the lived experience of the people. The government says, "We are prosperous. We are one." The brickmaker looks at his empty bowl and says, "I am hungry. I am alone." The language of the center has become a foreign tongue to the periphery. When this dissonance reaches a breaking point, the psychological glue that holds the superstate together begins to dissolve. We spoke earlier of groupthink, the intoxication of the collective. Now we see the flip side, cognitive overload. When the world becomes too complex to understand, when the rules change too often, when the hierarchy is too vast to navigate, the human mind retreats. We cannot process the global, so we retreat to the local. Trust evaporates. In a high-trust society, you can cooperate with a stranger because you both speak the one language of shared norms. But when the system fractures, that stranger becomes a potential threat. You stop looking at the tower. You start looking at your immediate survival. You stop identifying as a citizen of Babel, and you remember that you are a shepherd from the Zagros Mountains, or a fisherman from the marshes. As we stand in the twilight of the Plain of Shinar today, the great Ziggurat is gone. It is a tell, a low, gentle mound rising from the flat horizon, covered in scrub grass and dust. The wind has smoothed over the scars of human industry. The shape of the melted mud brick mound is soft, almost organic, like a sleeping giant that has finally found its rest. The heat of the day has dissipated. The cool desert night settles over the land. The silence is complete. There are no shouts of overseers, no clanking of tools, just the whisper of the wind moving the sand. And then the stars appear. One by one, they ignite in the velvet darkness above. The constellations of the hunter, the bull, the twins, they are the same stars that looked down on the first nomads. The same stars that watched the first bricks being laid. The same stars that watched the tower fall. They are the only things that truly reach heaven. The tower tried to compete with them, to storm their heights with mud and bitumen, but the tower is dust, and the stars remain, untouched, burning with a cold, eternal light. In this realization, there is permission to let go. We do not need to build the world. We do not need to hold the sky up with our own hands. We do not need to make a name that lasts forever. It is enough to be here for a moment on the earth. It is enough to be a stone, unique and imperfect, rather than a brick in the wall. The wind blows, the sand shifts. The memory of Babel fades into the dream of the desert, and the world sleeps. The story of the tower does not end with the dispersal of the people. It does not end when the myth takes over. For thousands of years, the truth of Babel lay buried under the very mud from which it was made. To truly understand the magnitude of this fallen superstate, we must fast forward through the corridors of time, past the fall of empires, past the changing of maps, to the shovel of the archaeologist. We must return to the site, not as builders, but as excavators, sifting through the debris to find the physical evidence of the dream. For centuries, the location of the tower was a matter of speculation. Travelers in the Middle Ages would point to the ruined ziggurat at Borsippa, or the twisting minaret of Samarra, and say, "There, that is Babel." But they were looking at echoes. The true foundation lay hidden, a ghost waiting in the earth. It was not until the turn of the 20th century, in 1899, that a German archaeologist named Robert Koldewey arrived on the banks of the Euphrates. He was a man of patience, a man who understood that history is not written in ink, but in layers of dirt. He began to dig, and he did not stop for 18 years. Imagine the atmosphere of that excavation. The same relentless sun that baked the original bricks now beat down on the men uncovering them. The air was filled with the dust of millennia. As Koldewey's team cut through the mounds, they did not just find a city, they found the metropolis of the world. They found Babylon, and in the center of that vast, sprawling ruin, they found the square footprint of a monster. They found the foundations of the Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Let us walk the perimeter of this discovery. The sheer scale of the math is hypnotic. The base of the tower was a perfect square, roughly 91 meters on each side. To walk around it is a journey of nearly half a kilometer. This was not a mere temple. It was an artificial mountain of solid masonry. The core was composed of millions of unbaked mud bricks, the sun-dried labor of the masses we spoke of earlier. But wrapping this soft core was a skin of burnt brick 15 meters thick. Think of the labor represented by that number. 15 meters of solid, kill-fired ceramic. Every single one of those bricks had to be molded, carried, stacked, fired, and laid. Every single one represents a day in the life of a human being who lived, breathed, and died 5,000 years ago. To touch one of these bricks is to touch the frozen time of the superstate. The archaeologists found something else, something that brings the confusion of tongues into sharper relief. They found that many of these bricks were stamped. In the center of the baked clay, a square seal had been pressed, bearing an inscription. It was the name of the king, Nebuchadnezzar II, who had attempted to rebuild the ancient ruin. The inscription reads, "I mobilized all countries everywhere, the kings of distant nations. I made them carry the brick basket." Here, etched in the clay, is the confirmation of the one language of administration. It is the voice of the central planner, boasting of his ability to force diversity into unity. I mobilized all countries. The tower was a project of international labor, a convergence of people who spoke different tongues, forced to work under a single command. The archaeology confirms the psychology. The tower was an engine of assimilation. But let us move from the brick to the atmosphere of the city that surrounded it. To understand why the tower was built, we must understand the sensory experience of approaching it. Imagine walking down the procession street of Babylon. It is the height of the New Year's festival, the Akichu. The air is thick with the scent of burning frankincense and cedar. The noise of the city is a dull roar, but here, on the sacred way, there is a rhythmic chanting. The street is paved with slabs of limestone and red breccia, imported stones that cool the feet. Rising before you is the Ishtar Gate. It is not brown like the desert. It is a shocking, vibrant blue. The bricks have been glazed with lapis lazuli dust, fired to a glass-like finish. It shines like a piece of the sky brought down to earth. On the blue walls, golden lions and dragons march in relief, their muscles tensed, their mouths open in silent roars. This is the propaganda of the superstate. It is designed to make you feel small. It is designed to overwhelm the senses with beauty and power. As you pass through the gate, the ziggurat looms ahead. It is painted, as Herodotus and the excavated fragments suggest, in bands of color. The base is black, coated in bitumen, the underworld. The next layer is red, the color of the earth, then white, then blue, and at the very top, the shrine, shining with gold. The ascent of the tower was a ritual of leaving the human world behind. The priests who climbed those stairs were ascending through the layers of the cosmos. With each step, the noise of the market faded. The smell of the unwashed bodies of the commoners drifted away. The heat of the ground level was replaced by the cooler, cleaner air of the summit. This vertical separation is crucial to the internal roadmap of the documentary. It illustrates the physical manifestation of the hierarchy. The higher you went, the more real you became. The people at the bottom, the ones whose languages would eventually be confused, were living in the shadow of the structure. They were in the dark. Only the initiated, only those who spoke the pure language of the court, could see the sun from the summit. Koldewey's excavation revealed something else, the triple staircase. 3 massive flights of stairs led up the south face of the tower, 1 central, 2 lateral. This design was not just functional, it was theatrical. It allowed for processions. Imagine the visual of the king and the high priest, dressed in robes of heavy embroidered wool, slowly ascending the central stair, while the choirs chanted from the side stairs. It was a performance of power. The tower was a stage. But the archaeology also reveals the fragility we spoke of in Act 4. The excavators found that the water table in the region is high. The Euphrates is a life-giver, but it is also a destroyer. The groundwater creeps into the foundations. The salts in the soil eat away at the bricks. Koldewey found that the builders had to install elaborate drainage systems, weeper holes in the masonry to let the moisture escape. Even at the height of its glory, the tower was fighting a losing battle against the swamp. The Superstate was built on wet mud. This is a profound geological truth that mirrors the sociological truth. You can bake the bricks as hard as you like. You can glaze the walls with blue glass, but if the foundation is mud, the water will eventually win. The forces of nature, hydrostatic pressure, salt crystallization, erosion are the physical equivalents of the confusion of tongues. They are the chaotic, uncontrollable variables that the central planner cannot legislate away. In the debris of the tower, archaeologists also found remnants of the archives de Edeba, or tablet house. These were the scribal schools. This is where the one language was taught. Young men were taken from their families and drilled for years in the complex signs of cuneiform. They were taught to suppress their local dialects and write in the standardized Sumerian of the state. We can imagine the atmosphere of these schools. Rows of students sitting on clay benches, the damp smell of the wet tablets, the stern gaze of the school father, the headmaster. They wrote lines like the scribal art is the mother of orators, the father of masters. They were being programmed. They were being turned into the software that would run the hardware of the tower. But the excavations show us that this system, too, broke down. As the empire frayed, the quality of the writing declined. The standardized forms became sloppy. Local variations crept back into the official texts. The one language began to drift. The archaeological record literally shows the confusion of tongues happening in the clay. The rigid discipline of the Edeba could not hold back the natural evolution of speech. Today, if you visit the site excavated by Koldewey, you will see the unfinished colossal mentioned in the myth. But it is a negative space. The bricks were taken away, as we noted, to build the houses of Baghdad and Hiller. What remains is a moat filled with water, a square hole in the earth where the tower once stood. This is the ultimate irony of the archaeological memory. The tower that was meant to reach the heavens is now a hole in the ground. The ambitious vertical line has become a horizontal void. It is a mirror reflecting the sky, but it is empty. This void is perhaps the most powerful image for the sleep history niche. It is a place of absolute stillness. The reeds grow around the edges of the water-filled trench. The frogs croak in the evening sound older than the city, older than the bricks. The name they tried to make has been swallowed by the water. As we linger here in the ruins, we are invited to feel the texture of the past. Run your hand over a fragment of a brick found in the dust. Feel the roughness of the straw impression left 5,000 years ago. Feel the stamp of the king who thought he was eternal. It is cold, it is heavy, it is just Earth. The archaeological reality grounds the myth. It tells us that this was not a fairy tale. Real hands mixed this mud. Real backs broke under the weight of these baskets. Real minds broke under the weight of the complexity. The Tower of Babel was a real moment in the human experiment, a moment when we pushed the limits of our social technology and found them wanting. And yet, in the silence of the excavation, there is a strange beauty. The blue shards of the Ishtar Gate still shine in the museum cases, vibrant after all this time. The art remains, the ambition remains. We are the descendants of those builders. We still have the mud on our hands. We still look at the sky and wonder if we can reach it. But the hole in the ground at Babylon whispers a gentle warning. The earth always waits. The earth always wins. The ruin in the desert is silent, but the idea that built it is louder than ever. We have spent hours walking through the dust of the ancient world, feeling the heat of the Mesopotamian sun and the roughness of the brick. But as we move toward the conclusion of our meditation, we must acknowledge a haunting truth. The Tower of Babel did not truly fall. It merely changed form. The Ziggurat is no longer made of mud and bitumen. It is made of fiber optics, servers, and the invisible architecture of the global economy. The superstate has shed its physical skin to become a state of mind. To understand the shadow that the Ziggurat casts over our own lives, we must revisit the central psychological innovation of Shinar, the one language. In the ancient world, this was the administrative uniformity of the scribe. Today, we have achieved a level of uniformity that Nebuchadnezzar could only dream of. We have built a new digital Plain of Shinar, a flat, borderless expanse where billions of people have gathered. Consider the internet. Is it not the ultimate fulfillment of the promise, nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do? We have dissolved the barriers of geography. We have collapsed the distance between the tribe in the north and the tribe in the south. We have created a space where we all speak a kind of one language, the language of binary code, the language of the interface, the language of the algorithm. In this new digital city, we are seeing the return of the brick. In the ancient world, the brick was the standardized citizen, molded by the state to fit into the wall. Today, the brick is the user profile. It is the standardized unit of the digital economy. We are flattened into data points, our complexities, our jagged edges, our contradictions, the stone nature of our souls are smoothed over to fit into the database. We are categorized, tagged, and stacked. We willingly submit to the mold because, just like the people of Shinar, we fear the alternative. We fear the wilderness of disconnection. We fear being scattered abroad and invisible to the network. The psychological trade-off remains exactly the same. We trade our privacy, our autonomy, for connection, the security of the hive. We seek to make a name for ourselves in the digital ether, counting our likes and our followers as the ancients counted their bricks, believing that if we can just pile them high enough, we will achieve a kind of immortality. We will not be forgotten. But the confusion of tongues is also re-emerging, and it is more violent than before. We see the paradox of the superstate playing out in real time. We have built the ultimate tool for communication, yet we have never been more misunderstood. The one language of the internet has not created unity, it has created a cacophony, just as the bureaucracy of Babel became too complex to manage. The information overload of the modern world has triggered a cognitive collapse. We are drowning in noise. The shared reality is fracturing. We see the return of tribalism in the form of echo chambers and algorithmic silos. People are retreating from the town square of the global internet back into small, private group chats, the digital equivalent of the ancient campfire. They are seeking refuge from the noise of the city in the quiet of the faction. The system has become too big, too loud, and too complex for the human primate to process. The system collapse is happening in our attention spans. Let us also look at the economic shadow of the tower. The economy of Shinar was the first fiat system, a system based on command and trust rather than just simple barter. The one language of the scribes allowed them to create value out of thin air, to record debts and promises on clay tablets. Today, our economy is a tower of unimaginable height, built on the bricks of credit and debt. The global financial system is a modern ziggurat. It is a structure of immense complexity, where value is derived from the confidence of the collective. It relies on everyone believing the same story about money. But like the Etemenanki, it is built on a foundation that requires constant maintenance. It requires the bitumen of central banking liquidity to keep the bricks from flying apart. When we look at the skyscrapers of our financial districts, London, New York, Shanghai, we are looking at the direct architectural descendants of Babel. They are the axis mundi of our time. They pierce the clouds, asserting the dominance of commerce over nature. They are beautiful, awe-inspiring, and terrifyingly fragile. The lesson of the collapse of complexity is relevant here. Joseph Tainter's theory warns us that as our economic systems become more interconnected, they become more vulnerable to cascading failure. A misunderstanding in one part of the tower, a bank failure, a supply chain disruption can instantly propagate through the entire structure. The one language of global trade means that a cough in one nation becomes a fever in another. We are bound together in a way that makes the great dispersion impossible without catastrophic pain. And yet there is a deep evolutionary part of us that yearns for the dispersion. We are not designed to live in the hive. Evolutionary psychology tells us that the human brain is adapted for a group size of about 150 people, the Dunbar number. This is our natural stone state. The superstate forces us to interact with thousands, millions, even billions of abstract others. This creates a chronic low-level stress. It is the vibration of the tower shaking the foundation of our nervous systems. The anxiety we feel in the modern world, the sense of being overwhelmed, the fear of missing out, the pressure to conform is the vibration of the ziggurat. It is the tension between our biological heritage as wanderers and our social reality as bricks. But there is a gentle hope in this realization. If the Tower of Babel is a story about the inevitable failure of total control, then it is also a story about the resilience of the human spirit. The story tells us that the confusion was not a punishment, but a rescue. It was the mechanism that prevented humanity from becoming a monolithic colony. It preserved our differences. It preserved the many languages of art, culture, and thought. Perhaps the shadow of the ziggurat is not something to be feared, but recognized. We are living in a time of high centralization. Yes, we are building our towers, but the earth is still there beneath the pavement. The wind still blows. The stars still rise. The ancient rhythms of the planet, the turning of the seasons, the need for sleep, the love of family are stronger than any system we can build. As we sleep, we step out of the tower. We leave the one language of the waking world behind. In our dreams, we return to the primal, non-verbal state of being. We become nomads again, wandering through landscapes of our own making, free from the overseer, free from the mold. Sleep is the daily dispersion. It is the moment we put down the brick and remember who we are. The legacy of Babel is a warning, but it is also a permission slip. It gives us permission to embrace our limits. It gives us permission to be small. It reminds us that we do not have to carry the weight of the world's architecture on our shoulders. We can let the tower stand or fall. It does not matter. The foundation of our lives is not the brick, but the breath. In the final movement of our documentary, we will return to that breath. We will leave the philosophy and the history behind and return to the sensory experience of the desert night. We will watch the dust settle one last time, not as a symbol of failure, but as a blanket of peace. The shadow of the ziggurat fades as the true night falls, bringing with it the ancient, healing silence of the dispersion. We have walked a long road together. We have traveled from the high, cold mountains of the east down into the heat of the alluvial plain. We have seen the smoke rise from the kilns. We have heard the chant of the priests and the shout of the overseers. We have watched the bricks rise, one by one, to challenge the sky, and we have watched them crumble, one by one, back into the earth. The history is finished. The analysis is finished. The striving of the mind to understand, to categorize, to learn that too is finished. Now there is only the landscape. Now there is only the rest. Let the image of the tower fade from your mind. It is no longer a structure of sharp edges and geometric ambition. It is soft now. It is a blur of brown and gold against the twilight. The details are smoothing over. The king's name stamped on the brick is worn away by the wind. The blue glaze of the Ishtar gate is covered in a fine layer of dust. The complexity of the superstate, the noise of the one language, the anxiety of the great dispersion, all of it is dissolving into the simple, rhythmic breathing of the desert. Focus your attention on the ground. The earth here is warm. It holds the memory of the sun long after the star has dipped below the horizon. It is a comforting warmth, a radiant heat that rises up to meet you. This is the same earth that was here before the first city was built, and it is the same earth that will be here after the last city falls. It is patient. It is solid. It is the bed upon which all of history rests. Feel the texture of the timeline slowing down. We are no longer rushing through centuries. We are no longer counting the years of kings or the collapse of empires. We are entering the time of geology, the time of the stone, the time of the sand. In this time, nothing happens quickly. In this time, there is no urgency. There is only being. Listen to the sound of the Euphrates River. It is a low, constant murmur in the darkness. She did, flows from the north, carrying the melted snow of the mountains down to the sea. It flowed when the plain was empty. It flowed when the tower was rising. It flowed when the tower fell. It flows now. It does not judge the ambitious projects of humanity. It simply washes around them. It cleanses the mud. It smooths the stones. It is the liquid pulse of the world, beating slowly, steadily, without pause. Imagine yourself sitting by the banks of this ancient river. The reeds are tall around you, swaying gently in the night breeze. The air is cooling down. The intense heat of the day has broken, replaced by a soft, velvet darkness. You can smell the water, a fresh, clean scent of life in the midst of the dry desert. You can smell the clay, the damp, earthy scent of creation. The wind picks up just a little. It moves across the vast, flat plain of Shinar. It passes over the mounds of the buried cities. It whispers through the empty window frames of the ruins, but it is not a lonely sound. It is a lullaby. It is the sound of the earth singing itself to sleep. The wind carries away the dust of our worries. It carries away the need to build, the need to achieve, the need to be remembered. It leaves only the peace of the present moment. Look up. The sky is no longer the domain of the Ziggurat. It is open, it is vast, and in that deep darkness, the stars begin to emerge. Watch them appear. One, then another, then 10, then 1,000. They are not like the lights of the city, which are harsh and flickering. The stars are steady. They are cold, diamond-hard points of light. They are the campfires of the ancestors, watching over the sleeping world. They form the great constellations, the hunter, the bull, the river of stars. They turn slowly, majestically, on the great wheel of the night. They do not strive, they do not struggle to climb higher. They simply are. They hang in the perfect balance of the cosmos, suspended in the silence of space. As you watch them, you feel your own spirit lifting, expanding, becoming as light and as silent as the starlight. You are no longer a brick in the wall. You are a part of this vast, turning sky. The Tower of Babel is gone. The confusion is gone. The separation is gone. There is only this unity, the unity of the sleeper and the night, the unity of the breath and the wind, the unity of the mind and the silence. Let your breathing match the rhythm of the river, in and out, flowing and releasing. With every breath, you are letting go of a layer of complexity. You are unstacking the bricks of your day. You are taking down the walls you have built. You are returning to the ground. You are returning to the simple, organic truth of your own existence. The dust settles. The sand stops moving. The reeds are still. Even the river seems to slow its pace, moving like dark oil under the moonlight. The world is coming to a halt. The great machine of civilization has been turned off. The lights are out. The heavy doors are closed. You are safe here. You are hidden in the dispersion. You are free from the eyes of the crowd. You are free from the demands of the one language. You do not need to speak. You do not need to understand. You only need to drift. Drift back to the garden that existed before the city. Drift back to the silence that existed before the speech. Drift back to the peace that existed before the ambition. The mound of the tower is just a hill now, a gentle curve in the darkness. It is sleeping. The kings are sleeping. The builders are sleeping. The scribes are sleeping. And you, too, are joining them in the great, timeless democracy of rest. There is nothing left to build. There is nothing left to climb. The horizon is flat. The way is open. The night is yours. Sleep, sleep, sleep.